In the suffocating August of 1843, Dr. William Prescott found himself within the drawing room of Magnolia Grove Plantation, nestled in Wilkes County, Georgia. In his hands rested the 31st infant, a daughter born to Delilah, a woman held in bondage. Like all those who preceded her, this child bore features undeniably belonging to Cornelius Ashford, not the estate's proprietor, Edmund Ashford, but his younger sibling. The identical distinctive dimple in the chin, the same strikingly pale grey eyes, and the peculiar birthmark just behind the left ear, a small crescent-shaped discoloration that appeared without fail on every single one of Delilah's offspring. Dr. Prescott had overseen the delivery of 23 of these 31 infants over a span of 17 years. He had witnessed the seemingly impossible recurrence of genetic traits that contradicted his entire understanding of human procreation. He had observed Edmund Ashford's countenance shift from bewilderment to suspicion and finally to a far more somber expression with each new child born bearing his brother's unmistakable likeness. And he had meticulously documented every birth, every measurement, every impossible similarity, for William Prescott knew he was bearing witness to something that would forever weigh upon his soul. The physician held the newborn girl in his time-worn hands, scrutinizing her features with the same precise attention he had afforded her 30 preceding siblings. The grey eyes that seemed to peer through him rather than at him, the subtly uneven cleft in the chin, a mirror image of Cornelius Ashford's own. And there, behind the left ear, already visible despite the infant's tender age, that singular crescent-shaped birthmark that had graced every child Delilah had ever brought into existence. Prescott had measured this mark on child after child, recording its exact dimensions, its precise placement, its unchanging characteristics. On this 31st infant, it was identical to all the others, the margin of error too minuscule for his instruments to discern. What transpired at Magnolia Grove Plantation between 1826 and 1843 remains one of the most profoundly disturbing documented instances of reproductive exploitation in the antebellum South. The narrative encompasses fraternal betrayal, the systematic subjugation of an enslaved woman, and an enigma that the medical science of that era could not unravel. The truth, when it finally came to light, would utterly decimate the Ashford family, leaving behind questions that still fuel scholarly debate today. The Ashford lineage had held dominion over lands in Wilkes County since 1792, when Bartholomew Ashford was granted 2,000 acres in recognition of his service during the Revolutionary War. Bartholomew had served as a lieutenant under General Nathaniel Greene during the Southern Campaign. Distinguished not by exceptional valor or strategic genius, but by the simple merit of survival, he was one of the few men from his original cohort to emerge from the conflict with all his limbs intact. The Georgia land grant was his recompense for fortitude rather than battlefield heroism. Yet Bartholomew proved to be a far more capable agriculturist than a soldier. By the 1820s, the family had firmly established themselves as one of the most influential planting dynasties in central Georgia, their holdings including Magnolia Grove, a 1,700-acre cotton enterprise, and Riverside, a more modest estate of 800 acres dedicated to the cultivation of tobacco and rice. Bartholomew had augmented his original 2,000 acres through astute acquisitions during the financial downturns of 1807 and 1819. While distressed planters divested their properties for a pittance, he constructed the main residence at Magnolia Grove in 1814, a Greek revival edifice boasting 16 rooms and expansive verandas designed to capture any fleeting breezes that might penetrate the Georgia heat. Bartholomew's sons, Edmund and Cornelius, were born 3 years apart. Edmund arrived in 1801, Cornelius in 1804. From their earliest years, the brothers were as dissimilar as could be imagined, and Bartholomew made no secret of his paternal preference. Edmund was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and brown eyes that echoed their mother's Scots-Irish heritage. He possessed a practical, methodical disposition and was wholly dedicated to the intricacies of plantation management. By the age of 12, he could mentally calculate crop yields. By 16, he was supervising work crews alongside the overseer. By 20, he had already implemented crop rotation techniques that boosted Magnolia Grove's output by 40%. Cornelius, in stark contrast, was slender and fair-skinned, with those distinctive pale grey eyes that seemed to gaze through individuals rather than at them. These eyes originated from Bartholomew's mother, a woman who had passed away long before her grandchildren were born, but whose portrait adorned the main drawing room, her grey gaze appearing to follow visitors as they moved through the space. Cornelius exhibited no inclination towards agriculture or commerce. Instead, his youth was devoted to the study of philosophy, the composition of poetry, and the pursuit of what his father dismissively labelled as unproductive intellectual pastimes. He could recite Virgil and Homer in their original Latin and Greek, yet he was incapable of distinguishing a cotton boll ready for harvest from one requiring an additional week on the plant. When Bartholomew passed away in 1824, his will mirrored his evaluation of his son's capabilities. Edmund inherited Magnolia Grove and the majority of the family's enslaved populace, 147 individuals whose names were listed in the will as chattel, alongside livestock and farming implements. Cornelius received Riverside, a modest financial settlement of $8,000, and directives to forge his own path or face permanent disinheritance through a trust designed to eventually transfer his property to Edmund's progeny. The brothers' relationship, already strained by their father's overt favoritism, deteriorated further following the reading of the will. Cornelius felt he had been unjustly deprived of his birthright, that his father's partiality towards Edmund had blinded the elder man to Cornelius's true merit. Edmund believed his brother to be an indolent dreamer who merited precisely what he had been bequeathed, and that their father had, if anything, been overly magnanimous in granting Cornelius anything at all. For 2 years, they communicated minimally, interacting solely through legal representatives in matters of property disputes concerning boundary lines and shared water access. Then, in the spring of 1826, everything shifted. Cornelius arrived at Magnolia Grove without prior announcement on a Tuesday afternoon in March, riding up the long, tree-lined drive on a hired horse, having been compelled to sell his own mount. He professed a desire to reconcile with his brother Edmund. Edmund, who had recently wed Margaret Townsend, a scion of a distinguished Savannah family, harbored initial reservations. Margaret, having heard nothing flattering of her brother-in-law from any source in the county, urged Edmund to dismiss Cornelius. However, Edmund, despite his pragmatic nature, was plagued by a sense of guilt regarding the circumstances of their father's testament. He had not sought favoritism, he had simply been himself, and Bartholomew had responded accordingly. Cornelius possessed a charm when he so desired, a wit and eloquence entirely absent in Edmund. Over several weeks of visits, the brothers appeared to mend their fractured bond. Cornelius lauded Edmund's improvements to the plantation. Edmund offered Cornelius counsel on the management of Riverside. They rode together through the fields, shared evening meals, and gradually rebuilt something akin to the camaraderie they had enjoyed as young boys before their father's partiality had driven them apart. Cornelius began spending extended periods at Magnolia Grove, ostensibly assisting Edmund with plantation operations, while acquiring the skills their father had never bothered to impart. It was during one of these sojourns that Cornelius first encountered Delilah. Delilah had arrived at Magnolia Grove in 1825, purchased at auction in Augusta for $750. She was approximately 18 years old at the time of her acquisition, though precise birth records were absent. The bill of sale, preserved within the Ashford family archives, described her as a healthy female of mixed heritage, suitable for domestic service or field labor, with no history of insubordination or disciplinary issues. The document bore the signature of her former proprietor, a bankrupt merchant named Harkins, who was liquidating all his assets to appease creditors. What the document failed to convey was her extraordinary beauty, a fact noted in multiple accounts from that period. She stood approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, a height unusual for a woman of any race in that era. Her features suggested a complex ancestry that might have encompassed African, European, and possibly Native American lineage, although such determinations were inherently speculative within the context of American slavery. What was certain was that she attracted attention wherever she went, and that this attention would prove to be both her greatest protection and her gravest peril. Dr. Prescott, who examined her shortly after her arrival as part of Edmund's standard health assessments of new acquisitions, recorded in his private journal, Delilah possesses a remarkable physical presence, with features suggesting significant European ancestry. Her complexion is light enough to be mistaken for Mediterranean. Her hair falls in loose waves rather than tight coils, and her eyes are an unusual amber hue that I have rarely encountered in individuals of African descent. She carries herself with a dignity that implies either prior domestic service or perhaps even some education, though she professes no knowledge of reading or writing. Her teeth are in excellent condition, her limbs are straight and strong, and she exhibits no signs of previous illness or mistreatment. She will command a high price should Edmund ever decide to sell her, though I suspect he will not. That final observation proved to be one of the most prescient in Prescott's extensive career. Edmund initially assigned Delilah to kitchen duties under the tutelage of an elder enslaved woman named Hattie. Hattie had resided at Magnolia Grove since before Edmund's birth, had known his mother, and held a position of considerable authority within the enslaved community. She was accountable for providing sustenance to everyone on the plantation, from the Ashford family in the main house to the field hands in the quarters, and her kitchen was her dominion. She took one look at Delilah and foresaw trouble. "That girl is too pretty for her own good," Hattie reportedly confided to another enslaved woman named Rose. "Master Edmund is already looking at her as if she were made of gold. Nothing good ever comes from white men looking at colored women that way. Nothing good ever comes of it." Hattie's assessment proved accurate within months. Edmund began finding pretexts to frequent the kitchen with increasing regularity. He praised Delilah's culinary skills, despite her merely assisting and having prepared nothing herself. He requested that she serve meals in the dining room, a task typically reserved for house servants with more experience. He commissioned new garments for her of finer quality than those worn by other enslaved individuals, and instructed Hattie to ensure she was perpetually clean and presentable. Margaret Ashford observed her husband's lingering gazes at the new servant with growing unease. She had been married to Edmund for less than a year and was already expecting their first child. The union had been arranged by their families for pragmatic reasons, combining Ashford acreage with Townsend shipping interests, but Margaret had harbored hopes for affection, if not love. Now she watched her husband become fixated on an enslaved woman who embodied everything Margaret was not: exotic, mysterious, and utterly incapable of refusing any demand made of her. In the autumn of 1825, Margaret insisted that Delilah be reassigned to the kitchen and entirely excluded from the main house. Edmund complied, but his interest had been noted by others on the plantation, including his brother. Cornelius, during his reconciliation visits, had also observed Delilah. Unlike Edmund, who was possessive yet cautious, Cornelius approached the situation with the recklessness that defined his entire existence. He began actively seeking opportunities to be alone with Delilah, appearing in the kitchen during quiet hours, orchestrating encounters in the outbuildings where she was occasionally dispatched to fetch supplies. The precise circumstances of what transpired between Cornelius and Delilah were never directly recorded. Enslaved women did not provide testimony in courts. Their experiences were not deemed worthy of documentation by the white individuals who controlled such records. However, the consequence of those encounters became undeniable in March of 1826. When Delilah became pregnant for the first time, the child, a boy, was born in December of that year. Edmund recorded the birth in his plantation ledger with the notation, "Male child born to Delilah, healthy, named Samuel." The entry omitted any mention of paternity, which was standard practice for enslaved children. Under Georgia law, the offspring of enslaved women were the property of the mother's owner, irrespective of the biological father's identity. This legal fiction permitted plantation owners to profit from their own sexual transgressions against enslaved women while maintaining a veneer of respectable familial life. What was not standard was the annotation Edmund added in a different ink, apparently months later. Peculiar coloring, and then beneath it, in handwriting that had clearly been inscribed while Edmund was either intoxicated or severely agitated. Impossible. Samuel, like all 30 of his siblings who would follow, was born with pale grey eyes and the distinctive features of Cornelius Ashford. The resemblance was impossible to overlook. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, anyone who had ever met Cornelius could perceive the familial likeness, the same skeletal structure with its angular cheekbones and slightly narrow chin, the same unusual eye colour, that pale grey hue that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the same crescent-shaped birthmark behind the left ear, a mark that Cornelius had borne since his own birth and which his mother had always called his angel's kiss. Edmund's reaction to this revelation went unrecorded in any surviving document, but the circumstantial evidence points towards a profound psychological unraveling. He dispatched a letter to Cornelius in April of 1827, formally concluding their reconciliation. The letter, preserved among the Cornelius Ashford papers at the University of Georgia, is brief and devastating in its implications. "Brother," it reads, "I know what you have done. I know what you are. Do not return to Magnolia Grove. If you do, I will kill you." There was no signature, only Edmund's wax seal, pressed so forcefully into the paper that the wax fractured. Cornelius's response, sent a week later, was equally cryptic and far more cruel. "Dear brother," it stated, "I have done nothing that you did not drive me to do. You had everything, the land, the money, father's love, and still you desired more. You desired her too, though you pretended otherwise to your precious Margaret. The fault lies not in my actions, but in your insufferable pride. I shall remain away from your precious plantation, but remember that blood will tell. It always does. Yours in eternal brotherhood, Cornelius." What neither brother explicitly articulated in their correspondence was the truth that both tacitly understood. Cornelius had impregnated Delilah, either through seduction or coercion, during his visits to Magnolia Grove, and the child, Samuel, was his biological son, not Edmund's. And this betrayal, this fundamental breach of trust between brothers, would shape everything that followed for the next 17 years. But here is where the narrative takes its most somber and inexplicable turn. Instead of selling Delilah, which would have been the predictable response of a humiliated plantation owner seeking to efface the evidence of his shame, Edmund retained her. More than that, he began systematically impregnating her himself year after year for the next 17 years. Delilah would bear 31 children in total between 1826 and 1843, and every single child she bore, regardless of the year or circumstances of conception, continued to bear the striking resemblance of Cornelius Ashford. This biological impossibility was noted by Dr. Prescott in increasingly alarmed journal entries that span nearly 2 decades. The second child, born in 1828, exhibited the same grey eyes and cleft chin as the first. Prescott meticulously examined the infant, measuring the distance between the eyes, the angle of the jaw, the precise placement of the crescent birthmark. His measurements matched Samuel's exactly, within margins so infinitesimal they might have pertained to the same individual. So too did the third child, born in 1829, and the fourth in 1830, and the fifth in 1831. By the time Delilah had given birth to 10 children, all displaying identical features that mirrored Cornelius rather than Edmund, Dr. Prescott had begun to question his own sanity. He requested a leave of absence from his practice to consult with medical colleagues in Charleston, seeking any explanation for what he termed an unprecedented hereditary persistence. "I have examined the latest infant," he wrote in December of 1833, "and I am compelled to conclude that either everything I learned about human inheritance is fundamentally flawed, or something deeply unnatural is unfolding at Magnolia Grove. The statistical probability of 10 consecutive children exhibiting identical paternal characteristics when fathered by 2 different men is virtually 0. I have consulted mathematical texts to corroborate this assessment. The odds exceed 1 in several billion. Yet here they are, 10 children with Cornelius Ashford's likeness." Born to a woman who has not seen Cornelius in 7 years. Prescott's colleagues in Charleston were equally perplexed. The prevailing medical doctrine of the era posited that both parents contributed to a child's traits through the mingling of humoral essences during conception. Some characteristics derived from the father, others from the mother, blending to form a new individual. The notion that a mother could continue to produce offspring who bore an identical resemblance to a man who had not physically interacted with her for years was deemed impossible by every physician Prescott consulted. Several theories were proposed, each more far-fetched than the last. Perhaps Cornelius had somehow spiritually marked Delilah in a manner that transcended physical presence. Perhaps Edmund and Cornelius, despite their apparent divergences, were actually twins who had been misled about their birth order. Perhaps Delilah was secretly meeting Cornelius, despite Edmund's increasingly paranoid security measures. None of these conjectures satisfied Prescott's scientific rigor, yet he could offer no superior explanation. The enslaved community at Magnolia Grove developed their own interpretation of this phenomenon, one that circulated through hushed conversations in the quarters and around the firesides after dark. They believed Delilah had been divinely marked by Cornelius in some ethereal sense, that his essence had been imprinted upon her womb in a way that transcended corporeal proximity. Some referred to it as a curse, a retribution visited upon Edmund for perceived sins, real or imagined. Others termed it justice, divine intervention, ensuring that Edmund would never sire children with Delilah, whom he could truly claim as his own. Old Hattie, who had known Delilah since her arrival, reportedly told younger workers that some men leave their souls behind when they plant their seed, and Mr. Cornelius left his whole self inside that girl. Every baby she makes going to wear his face until she dies. Edmund's reaction to this ongoing humiliation evolved through distinct phases over the intervening years. In the initial period, according to testimony provided decades later during legal proceedings, he subjected Delilah to severe beatings after each birth, demanding to know how she managed to produce children who resembled his brother. These assaults occurred within the confined quarters where Delilah was housed during her pregnancies, witnessed only by Hattie and, on occasion, other enslaved women who assisted with the deliveries. Delilah, who bore these blows in quietude, reportedly offered Edmund the same words each occasion. "I cannot control what the Almighty places within me, sir. Only the Creator determines a child's appearance. I adhere to your directives. I remain where you assign me. I have not seen your brother since prior to Samuel's birth. I cannot offer an explanation. Only the divine can elucidate this matter." This response, whether born of genuine innocence or a remarkably astute strategy designed to inflict maximum emotional distress upon Edmund, seemed to propel him towards ever more extreme actions. He became utterly convinced that Delilah was somehow communicating with Cornelius through supernatural channels, that she was engaging in African sorcery or illicit enchantments, enabling her to draw his brother's very essence into her womb. He procured the services of a clergyman to offer supplication over her. He had her medically examined by a physician specializing in female ailments, seeking any tangible cause for the baffling occurrence. He even sought counsel from a woman locally recognized as a wise woman, a free black woman rumored to possess influence over the spiritual realm, though this consultation was conducted in utmost secrecy and is known only through veiled allusions within Edmund's private correspondence. None of these endeavors yielded any alteration. Children numbered 11 through 20, born between 1835 and 1840, all emerged bearing Cornelius's likeness. Prescott, increasingly troubled by the unfolding events, commenced documenting each birth with meticulous fervor. He measured the infant's cranial structures using calipers. He meticulously recorded the precise hue of their eye color, employing a personal classification system. He rendered sketches of their birthmarks, compiling diagrams illustrating their identical positioning and dimensions. His personal records from this epoch fill 3 substantial volumes, constituting one of the most thorough medical compilations of natal characteristics ever assembled in antebellum America. By 1835, according to recollections from surviving individuals formerly subjected to bondage, documented by the Federal Writers Project during the 1930s, Edmund had grown consumed by the imperative to disprove the impossible. He secluded Delilah in a remote cabin far removed from the primary slave quarters, posting sentries to ensure no other man could gain access to her. These guards were rotated frequently to preclude the development of any empathy for Delilah or susceptibility to bribes from potential interlopers. Edmund personally oversaw her sustenance, preventing any conceivable administration of substances that might offer an explanation for the phenomenon. He even arranged for Dr. Prescott to examine her both before and after each of his visits to her dwelling, searching for any evidence of external contact. Meanwhile, Cornelius Ashford had succumbed to utter dissipation at Riverside. Lacking the inherent discipline that characterized Edmund, Cornelius had allowed his smaller estate to fall into utter ruin. Crops failed year after year due to his apathy towards supervising their proper cultivation. Enslaved individuals absconded with increasing frequency, and Cornelius lacked both the means and the inclination to retrieve them. His overseer departed in 1832, having gone unpaid for a period of 6 months. Indebtedness mounted at an alarming rate. By 1838, Riverside was mortgaged to its absolute limit, and Cornelius was imbibing heavily, spending the majority of his days in a stupor, and most of his nights regaling anyone who would listen with tales of his brother's mortification. These whispers permeated Wilkes County and beyond, disseminated by wayfarers and tradesmen who traversed the region. In drawing rooms and public houses across central Georgia, individuals murmured about Edmund Ashford's peculiar predicament. Certain interpretations cast Edmund as a victim of his brother's deceit, a man cuckolded not merely once, but repeatedly for over a decade. Others posited that Edmund himself was infertile and had deliberately involved Cornelius to father children he himself could not produce, only to be betrayed by his brother's refusal to father offspring resembling Edmund. Still others alluded to more sinister possibilities, conjuring African witchcraft or pacts forged with forces that upright Christian individuals did not openly discuss. Margaret Ashford, Edmund's consort, was perhaps the most pitiable figure throughout this entire unfortunate affair, aside from Delilah herself. She had presented Edmund with 2 legitimate offspring within the main residence, a son named Edmund Jr. in 1827 and a daughter named Elizabeth in 1830. Both children were robust and clearly bore the expected resemblances to their parents in a natural fashion. Yet Margaret had observed her husband father at least 20 additional offspring with an enslaved woman during the duration of their union by the year 1840. Offspring who represented not merely marital infidelity, but a persistent emotional agony that refused to abate. According to correspondence penned by Margaret to her sister in Savannah, correspondence that by some providence survived and eventually found its way into the historical record through her sister's descendants, she implored Edmund repeatedly to divest himself of Delilah and bring an end to the torment that had consumed their lives. "I cannot endure another year observing those children mature," she wrote in 1836. "They are present on this estate in vast numbers, approaching 20 individuals now. Each one carries the countenance of a man I have never encountered, yet whose features are indelibly etched into my memory from the portrait displayed in the salon. I behold them in the fields. I observe them fetching water and performing manual labor. I see them in the kitchen assisting old Hattie. And with every sighting, I perceive my husband's ignominy and my own failure to capture his regard. My husband is annihilating himself through this fixation, and he is destroying me alongside him. I implore you, my sister, speak with father regarding intervention. My sanity is imperiled if this persists." Margaret's father, a prosperous Savannah merchant by the name of Thomas Townsend, did intercede in the spring of 1837. He journeyed to Magnolia Grove to confront Edmund directly. The encounter, pieced together from multiple accounts, including Townsend's own diary, proved unproductive. Edmund reportedly erupted in fury when his father-in-law suggested the sale of Delilah, exclaiming that no one comprehended his objectives. What precisely Edmund believed he was accomplishing remains obscure within the historical documentation. Certain scholars have proposed that Edmund endeavored, through repeated procreation, to demonstrate his capacity to eventually produce an offspring resembling himself, overcoming, through sheer perseverance, whatever influence was causing Delilah's children to bear Cornelius's features. Others have posited that Edmund's obsession had become self-sustaining, that he could no longer cease, even if he desired to, as doing so would signify capitulation to his brother. Still others have suggested more sinister motivations linked to the psychological dynamics of oppression and control that permeated the institution of slavery. Regardless of Edmund's rationale, his refusal to terminate the situation drove Margaret to increasing despair. By 1840, she was spending more time at her familial residence in Savannah than at Magnolia Grove, returning only for brief sojourns to maintain the semblance of normalcy. Her legitimate offspring received their education from private tutors in Savannah rather than at the plantation. Her marital union, whatever genuine affection it might have once harbored, had devolved into a hollow facade, sustained solely by the legal and financial entanglements that would accompany a formal separation. By 1840, Delilah had given birth to 25 children, all of whom survived infancy, a feat in itself remarkable considering the pervasive high rates of infant mortality prevalent during that era. Even among affluent Caucasian families, the loss of one or more offspring before the age of 5 was commonplace. Among enslaved individuals who received minimal medical attention and often inadequate sustenance, childhood mortality rates exceeded 30% in certain locales. Yet, all 25 of Delilah's offspring had endured, as if the very force ensuring their resemblance to Cornelius was also guaranteeing their continued existence to display these features. These children ranged in age from 14 years down to a newborn infant, and every one of them bore the distinct characteristics of Cornelius Ashford. Edmund had long since abandoned any pretense of claiming them as his own offspring or offering explanations to visitors. Instead, he assigned them to various labor roles across the estate, treating them neither with special favor nor particular harshness, simply integrating them into the operational workforce, much like any other enslaved individuals. However, every soul on the plantation was acutely aware of their identity. They were the marked children, the spectral progeny, the living testament to an unfathomable anomaly. The psychological burden borne by Edmund was palpable to all who encountered him during this period. Dr. Prescott noted in 1841 that Edmund had aged 20 years in the preceding decade. His hair had turned entirely grey by the age of 40, and his countenance was deeply lined, as if belonging to a man of 60. His hands trembled incessantly, whether from excessive consumption of alcohol or a nervous affliction he could not ascertain. Furthermore, he frequently spoke of demons, curses, and his brother's transgressions, sometimes in conversations where such topics were entirely irrelevant. He feared for Edmund's mental equilibrium and had suggested his admission to the asylum in Milledgeville, but Edmund refused to depart the plantation for any extended duration. Prescott's apprehensions regarding Edmund's psychological state proved well-founded as the 1840s unfolded. Edmund descended into escalating paranoia, perceiving conspiracies in every quarter. He accused his overseer of complicity with Cornelius and dismissed the man without prior notice. This final infant, a female, appeared with the same slate-colored eyes, the identical cleft chin, and the same crescent-shaped birthmark as all her predecessors. Dr. Prescott, cradling the infant while Delilah recovered from childbirth, reportedly vocalized what had occupied his thoughts for years. This is beyond possibility. None of this is medically explicable. I have delivered hundreds of infants throughout my professional career, and I have never witnessed anything comparable. It contravenes all established knowledge of human reproduction. What transpired subsequently was pieced together from numerous eyewitness accounts. During the ensuing inquiry, Edmund, who had been consuming alcohol heavily since Delilah's labor commenced, entered the dwelling where she had delivered. His attire was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot. The pistol he now perpetually carried was discernible in his waistband. He stood for a considerable interval, observing the infant in Dr. Prescott's embrace. his countenance cycling through a spectrum of emotions too complex and too fleeting to decipher. He then turned to Delilah, who lay exhausted on her cot after nearly 18 hours of labor, and posed a question that witnesses would struggle to interpret for years thereafter. "Where is he concealed?" Delilah's reply went unrecorded, but whatever she uttered seemed to trigger something profound within Edmund. He produced the pistol from his waistband, aimed it at Delilah, and declared his intention to eradicate the affliction once and for all. Dr. Prescott intervened immediately, positioning himself between Edmund and the bed, the newborn still nestled in his arms. He cautioned his long-standing friend that murder would invariably lead to repercussions. Even Edmund's wealth and standing could not shield him. The slaying of an enslaved woman in the presence of witnesses would compel even the most amenable sheriff to initiate proceedings. Edmund hesitated, the pistol quivering in his grasp, his visage a mask of conflicting impulses. He then lowered the weapon, but his parting words as he exited the cabin were chilling. "If I cannot resolve this through this means," he purportedly stated, "I shall devise another. My brother's progeny shall not inherit what rightfully belongs to me. I shall consign them all to the inferno before I permit such an outcome." 3 days hence, Edmund Ashford rode to Riverside Plantation, where his brother Cornelius continued to reside in progressively squalid circumstances. The once stately manor had devolved into a state of disrepair. The fields lay fallow. The majority of the enslaved laborers had been sold to satisfy debts, leaving only a scant few to maintain what little remained. Cornelius himself had become a shadow of his former charming youthful self, bloated by drink, aged by debauchery, surrounded by empty bottles and unpaid invoices. What transpired precisely between the brothers during this confrontation was never definitively established, as no witnesses were present. It is known that upon Edmund's return to Magnolia Grove the subsequent morning, Cornelius Ashford was deceased. The official narrative, which Edmund disseminated to anyone who would listen and reiterated in his formal deposition to the sheriff, was that Cornelius had attacked him with a knife during a dispute concerning outstanding debts, and Edmund had acted in self-defense. The solitary gunshot wound to Cornelius's chest corroborated this account, as did the knife discovered near the body bearing Cornelius's fingerprints on the handle. The Wilkes County Sheriff, a man named Patterson, who was considerably indebted to Edmund through gambling, conducted only a perfunctory investigation before deeming the death a justified homicide. The entirety of the inquiry spanned less than 4 hours, yet the enslaved community at both Magnolia Grove and Riverside harbored a different understanding. Stories circulated that Edmund had callously slain his brother, that he had premeditated the assassination for years, believing Cornelius's demise would somehow terminate the curse that had afflicted him for 17 years. These narratives were dismissed by Caucasian authorities as the product of enslaved superstition and a propensity for generating unrest, attributing it to the natural inclination of enslaved individuals to perceive malevolence where none existed. However, these accounts persisted because they possessed an intrinsic veracity. The question of whether Cornelius's death would impact future pregnancies became moot almost immediately. Delilah, whether due to deliberate intervention, the cumulative physical strain, or sheer happenstance, never conceived again after her 31st child. Dr. Prescott theorized in his journal that her reproductive system had simply been exhausted after 17 years of continuous childbearing, a medically plausible conclusion given the physical demands of producing 31 offspring, with minimal recovery periods between gestations. Yet others whispered that the curse had been broken with Cornelius's passing. That whatever spiritual bond had existed between him and Delilah had been severed upon his death, and that no further offspring would arrive because the origin of those children had been eradicated. What followed next transformed this already disturbing chronicle into something far more grievous, a descent into derangement and barbarity that would astound even those accustomed to the casual cruelty endemic to slavery. With Cornelius deceased and Delilah no longer bearing children, Edmund redirected his fixation. He became convinced that among Delilah's 31 offspring, one must be concealing documentation that Cornelius had previously acknowledged paternity. This documentation, Edmund believed, could potentially confer upon Cornelius's children legal claims to the Ashford estate. Although no such legal mechanism actually existed for enslaved children under Georgian law, Edmund's apprehension, however irrational, mirrored a profound disquiet concerning the stability of the entire slave system. The fundamental principle of American slavery rested upon the legal fiction that enslaved individuals were possessions, not persons. However, Delilah's children were undeniably Edmund's blood relatives through their father Cornelius. They were his nieces and nephews. If their paternity were formally recognized, it would introduce complications for which the legal framework was ill-equipped. Could property inherit from its owner's relations? Could enslaved children be deemed legitimate heirs if their father had acknowledged them? These inquiries were absurd in practical terms, but Edmund's deteriorating mental state had long since abandoned practicality. Edmund commenced interrogating Delilah's children individually. Beginning with the eldest and progressing downwards, he transported them to a modest structure he had repurposed into what he termed the questioning chamber, a former storage shed he had outfitted with implements designed to inflict suffering without causing permanent injury. What transpired within that chamber was recounted decades later by survivors in testimonies that are profoundly unsettling to read. Edmund employed methods of torture that he had apparently researched extensively, believing that agony would ultimately elicit the confession he sought. The first child subjected to this ordeal was Samuel, the eldest, then 17 years of age. Samuel, according to testimony from other enslaved individuals who heard his cries, endured 4 days of interrogation before Edmund was satisfied that he possessed no knowledge of any documents. He emerged unable to walk properly, with injuries to his hands and feet that would never fully mend. The precise nature of these injuries indicated a deliberate targeting of the extremities to maximize pain while preserving the victim's economic value as a laborer. Edmund proceeded to the next child, a 16-year-old named Thomas, who had been toiling in the cotton fields since the age of 10. Thomas lasted 3 days before Edmund concluded he had no pertinent information. Then came Rebecca, aged 15, whose interrogation persisted for 2 days. Over the subsequent months, Edmund systematically tortured 12 of Delilah's children, ranging in age from 17 down to 10. Certain sessions extended for days, others concluded swiftly when the child lost consciousness and could not be revived for further questioning. 2 children perished from their injuries, their deaths recorded in Edmund's ledger as accidental occurrences during disciplinary actions, a euphemism that would shield him from legal culpability under Georgian law, which technically prohibited the murder of enslaved individuals but rarely prosecuted masters who inflicted harm upon their property. The surviving children exhibited varying degrees of physical and psychological trauma. Some recuperated sufficiently to resume labor in the fields or household duties, though none would ever fully regain their former selves. Others were permanently incapacitated, their value as laborers destroyed by the very man who possessed them. All were traumatized in ways that would leave an indelible mark on them for the remainder of their lives, carrying the memories of their torment alongside their physical scars. And throughout this entire period, Delilah was compelled to bear witness to the suffering inflicted upon her offspring. Aware that any attempt to intervene would result in her own demise and possibly more severe mistreatment for them, she was brought to the questioning chamber during certain sessions. She was forced to observe as Edmund demanded information from children who possessed no such knowledge to impart. The psychological torment inherent in this arrangement was clearly intentional, serving as another form of torture directed at Delilah herself. Dr. Prescott, increasingly appalled by the atrocities he was witnessing, endeavored to document Edmund's transgressions while preserving a professional rapport sufficient to maintain access to the plantation. His private journals from this epoch contain detailed accounts of injuries consistent with known torture methodologies, alongside observations regarding Edmund's declining mental state. He noted that Edmund spoke incessantly of spectral voices, of perceiving Cornelius's visage wherever he looked, of the imperative to complete his task before his brother's offspring rebelled against him. In one particularly disturbing entry, Prescott recorded a conversation wherein Edmund articulated his rationale for the torture. "The children harbor knowledge," Edmund purportedly stated. "They must possess some understanding. Why else would they all resemble him? Why else would the Almighty have marked them thus? They conceal the truth from me, and I shall unearth it, even if I must shatter every bone in their bodies." Cornelius told them something before he died, Dr. Prescott attempted to reason with his old companion, highlighting that the youngsters had been under Edmund's command their entire lives, never encountering Cornelius, let alone receiving any correspondence from him. However, Edmund was beyond rational discourse. He had formulated an elaborate conspiracy narrative wherein every individual on the plantation was covertly acting against him, where Cornelius had somehow communicated with his offspring through supernatural means, and where the documented impossibility of their identical appearances served as evidence of a plot so intricate that Edmund could not fully grasp its scope. In February of 1844, Margaret Ashford finally took decisive action, unable to tolerate her husband's escalating irrationality any longer. She absconded from Magnolia Grove with her 2 legitimate children, seeking sanctuary with her father in Savannah. By the summer of 1844, Magnolia Grove teetered on the brink of financial ruin. The conclusion, when it arrived, was both foreseeable and startling in its finality. On the night of September 12, 1844, a conflagration erupted in the principal residence at Magnolia Grove. The blaze was first observed around 2 in the morning by an enslaved man named Joseph, who was en route to the privy and witnessed flames flickering behind the parlor windows. By the time any organized response could be mounted, the entire ground floor was consumed. By dawn, the elegant Greek revival edifice that Bartholomew Ashford had erected 3 decades earlier was nothing but smoldering debris. Edmund Ashford's remains were discovered in the wreckage the subsequent morning. Burned beyond identification, but identifiable by his distinctive pocket watch, which had survived the inferno in the pocket of his coat. The official cause of demise was recorded as an accidental fire, potentially initiated by a fallen candle or an ember from the hearth. Edmund had been imbibing heavily that night, as he had been consuming copious amounts of alcohol every night for years. It was easy to envision him succumbing to slumber with a candle still alight. Easy to imagine a spark alighting upon fabric and spreading before anyone could react. Yet nearly everyone cognizant of the circumstances did not believe it to be an accident. Some surmised that Delilah or her surviving offspring had set the fire, finally exacting retribution for years of mistreatment after Edmund's campaign of torture had pushed them beyond their limits. Others were of the opinion that Edmund himself had set the blaze either intentionally committing suicide or inadvertently while in a stupor so profound that he was unaware of his dwelling being consumed by flames. Still others whispered about Cornelius's spectral presence, asserting that the deceased brother had finally avenged himself from beyond the grave, that the malediction had not ceased with Cornelius's demise, but had merely transmuted into something more directly destructive. The inquiry into Edmund's death was conducted by the same Sheriff Patterson, who had previously deemed Cornelius's passing justifiable homicide. He spent precisely 1 day at Magnolia Grove before concluding that the fire was accidental and closing the case. No enslaved individuals were interrogated regarding their whereabouts that night. No evidence was collected from the ruins. The remaining Caucasian relatives of the Ashford family, anxious to avert further scandal and even more eager to claim any remaining assets, readily accepted the ruling and proceeded to settle the estate. What transpired with Delilah and her surviving offspring in the immediate aftermath of Edmund's death exemplifies the casual brutality that characterized the entire institution of slavery. The estate, burdened by substantial debts accrued during Edmund's final years of neglect, was liquidated at auction in November of 1844. The enslaved populace, including Delilah and 26 of her surviving children, were sold individually or in small groups to purchasers from across the South. Delilah herself, then approximately 37 years of age and physically weakened from 17 years of childbearing and mistreatment, sold for a mere $220, a fraction of her initial purchase price. Her beauty had waned. Her physique bore the marks of 31 pregnancies. Her value as a laborer was limited. The buyer was a modest farmer from Alabama named Jennings, who required domestic assistance for his elderly mother and was willing to pay a low sum for a woman with a reputation for causing trouble. However, before she departed Georgia, something remarkable occurred that would ensure at least a portion of her narrative endured. Dr. Prescott, who had observed the entire ordeal from its commencement to its conclusion, approached the executor of Edmund's estate with a proposition. He offered to acquire 3 of Delilah's younger children, those 2 diminutive to command high prices at auction, ostensibly to train them as medical assistants in his practice. His offer was accepted without question. What the executor failed to realize was that Dr. Prescott had no intention of retaining these children in servitude. He transported them to Philadelphia, where he had contacts within the abolitionist movement and arranged for their formal manumission under the laws of Pennsylvania. These 3 children, aged 8, 6, and 4 at the time of their liberation, grew up as free individuals in the North. 2 of them would eventually acquire literacy, and one of them, the youngest girl, would leave behind a memoir that provides vital first-hand information regarding life at Magnolia Grove. This memoir, titled Memories of Magnolia, and penned in 1882, serves as the source for numerous details in this account. Its author, who adopted the appellation Grace Freeman after her liberation, described the experience of being one of 31 children who all bore a striking resemblance to one another. "We were referred to as the ghost children by the other slaves," she wrote, "because we all possessed the same countenance, the countenance of a man none of us had ever met. Master Edmund would sometimes regard us with such animosity in his eyes that I believed he might strike us dead where we stood. But we had committed no transgression, we were merely children. We did not solicit being born with grey eyes and a mark behind our ears. We did not request any of it." Grace's memoir also recounts Delilah with the affectionate detail of a daughter, providing one of the scarce surviving depictions of Delilah's personality and character. "My mother was the most formidable individual I have ever encountered," she wrote. She bore 31 offspring and witnessed the demise of at least 2 of them due to Master Edmund's cruelty. She endured circumstances that I cannot commit to writing even now, 40 years hence, because certain recollections are too dreadful for articulation. Yet she never wavered. She never ceased to safeguard us to the best of her ability. Even though her protection was constrained by the manacles that bound her, and she never ceased to love us, even though our visages served as a daily reminder of the man who had violated her. Grace's memoir circulated amongst abolitionist factions in the North prior to the Civil War and was republished in anti-slavery periodicals as evidence of slavery's atrocities. Post-war, it was largely forgotten until historians rediscovered it in the 20th century and recognized its significance as a primary source document. The fate of Delilah's dispersed children mirrors the broader tragedy of slavery's disruption of familial ties. Of the 26 children sold at the estate auction, a mere 11 have been traceable through historical records. Some found themselves on cotton plantations in Alabama and Mississippi, engaged in the same brutal labor that had defined their existence at Magnolia Grove. Others were transported further south to Louisiana sugar operations, where conditions were even more severe. At least 3 were sold to slave merchants who conveyed them to the newly opened territories of Texas. Their descendants, if any exist today, likely possess no awareness of their familial connection to one another or the peculiar circumstances of their nativity. The 11 children, whose fates can be documented, all shared a singular, remarkable characteristic that continued to perplex observers for generations. According to records dating from the Civil War era and beyond, every single one of them who survived to adulthood produced offspring who exhibited the same distinctive features: the grey eyes, the cleft chin, the crescent birthmark behind the left ear. Whatever genetic anomaly had distinguished Delilah's children seemed to persist into the subsequent generation and beyond, defying the typical patterns of inheritance that would have predicted these traits would diminish and disappear over time. Grace Freeman noted this phenomenon in the concluding chapter of her memoir. "I have encountered 4 of my siblings since the conclusion of the war," she wrote. "We located each other through the Freedmen's Bureau and via advertisements placed in newspapers across the South, seeking lost family members. Each of them had children, and each of those children bore our father's visage, though none of us ever knew him during his lifetime. I have come to believe that Cornelius Ashford marked us in some fashion that science cannot elucidate, that his characteristics were impressed upon our lineage and will endure through generations yet unborn. Whether this constitutes a curse or a blessing, I cannot ascertain. We are as we are, the 31 children who all bore the same appearance." Dr. William Prescott passed away in 1868 at the age of 72. His journals, bequeathed to the Georgia Historical Society by his daughter, offer the most comprehensive medical documentation of the Magnolia Grove situation. In his final entry pertaining to the case, penned shortly before his demise, he reflected upon his observations. "I have practiced medicine for nearly 50 years, he wrote, "and I have witnessed occurrences that would challenge the convictions of the most devout believer, yet nothing in my experience compares to the enigma of Delilah's children. I examined each one of them with my own hands. I measured their features with calipers. I documented their identical birthmarks with sketches rendered at the moment of birth, and I can offer no explanation for any of it. Perhaps Providence was conveying a message to Edmund Ashford, marking every child with his brother's likeness as retribution for some transgression I never comprehended. Perhaps natural mechanisms are at play that our current science has yet to uncover. No historical marker commemorates the events that transpired there. No museum displays Dr. Prescott's meticulous renderings of 31 children with identical countenances. The narrative has largely faded from public consciousness, except within academic circles that examine the history of slavery. Yet perhaps this very obscurity is significant. The atrocities that unfolded at Magnolia Grove were not unique. They were merely a particularly well-documented instance of the systemic abuse that defined American slavery. Countless other enslaved women were coerced into bearing children they did not desire by men who viewed them as chattel rather than sentient beings. Countless other families were irrevocably sundered at auction. Countless other children grew up burdened by complex, agonizing questions about their origins that could never be definitively answered. Delilah survived the subjugation of slavery, though by a narrow margin. She passed away in Alabama in 1864, mere months before the cessation of the Civil War would have automatically granted her freedom. She was approximately 57 years of age and had spent the final 2 decades of her existence in relative tranquility, serving an elderly woman who treated her with an uncommon kindness by the standards of that era. Her grave, according to Grace Freeman's memoir, was marked by a simple wooden cross that has long since deteriorated. No photograph of her exists, no portrait was ever commissioned. The sole visual record of her appearance originates from Dr. Prescott's clinical descriptions within his medical journals, yet her legacy endures in ways she could never have fathomed. Genetic investigations conducted in the 21st century have identified several familial groups across the American South and Midwest who carry the distinctive combination of traits that marked Delilah's children: the gray eyes, the cleft chin, the crescent birthmark behind the left ear. DNA analysis has substantiated that these families share a common ancestry originating from Wilcox County, Georgia, in the mid-19th century. They are the descendants of the 31 children dispersed by slavery, but united by blood across generations. Some of these descendants have begun establishing connections with one another through genealogical websites and DNA testing services. They exchange photographs showcasing the persistent familial resemblance that so tormented Edmund Ashford nearly 2 centuries ago. They share family anecdotes passed down through the generations, fragments of memory that allude to their unusual origins, and they grapple with the complex emotions that accompany the realization that their existence commenced with an act of violation. The narrative of the enslaved woman who bore 31 children for her master, all 31 bearing the exact likeness of his brother. This raises questions that extend far beyond a single plantation in Georgia. It compels us to contemplate the meaning of identity when that identity is imposed by others. It urges us to confront the ways in which trauma resonates through generations, manifesting not only in psychological patterns, but at times in physical characteristics themselves. And it implores us to remember that behind every statistic pertaining to slavery, behind every perfunctory entry in a plantation ledger, were human beings whose suffering was as palpable and as profound as anything we might encounter today. Delilah never recounted her own story. She was illiterate, and even if she possessed the capacity to write, the circumstances of her life afforded her neither the opportunity nor the security to document her experiences. What we know of her derives from the observations of others, from Dr. Prescott's medical notes, from Grace Freeman's memoir, and from peripheral references in legal documents and estate inventories. Her voice has been lost to history, one among millions silenced by a system designed to treat human beings as property. However, her children survived. Her grandchildren endured. Her great-grandchildren and their descendants continue to persist, carrying forward a genetic inheritance that began with a betrayal between brothers and an enslaved woman who lacked the power to resist. They stand as living testament to the fact that even the most systematic endeavors to eradicate human beings can ultimately prove futile. That life perseveres, adapts, and continues despite every effort to extinguish it. Modern genetic science, had it been accessible during Edmund Ashford's era, might have provided explanations that would have spared all involved considerable suffering. We now understand that certain genetic traits can exhibit remarkable persistence, particularly when they are carried on multiple chromosomes or are linked to dominant inheritance patterns. The convergence of grey eyes, a cleft chin, and a crescent birthmark could represent what geneticists term a haplotype, a cluster of genes inherited together as a singular unit. If Cornelius possessed a particularly potent haplotype that superseded Edmund's genetic contributions, it could theoretically yield the outcomes documented by Dr. Prescott. However, even this hypothesis presents challenges. Contemporary geneticists who have reviewed Prescott's records indicate that the degree of consistency he documented would be unusual even with a dominant haplotype. The identical placement of the birthmark, measured with millimeter precision on each child, suggests phenomena extending beyond simple genetic inheritance. Some researchers propose that epigenetic factors may be implicated, chemical modifications to DNA that can be influenced by environmental conditions and can persist across generations. Others have posited that the records themselves might lack reliability, that Prescott's preconceived notions may have colored his measurements and observations. We will never ascertain with absolute certainty what caused Delilah's children to bear identical appearances. The physical evidence, the bodies themselves, were scattered across the South and are now beyond recovery. The genetic material that might have illuminated these questions has become diluted over nearly 2 centuries and across millions of descendants. What remains are the documents, the testimonies, and the unanswered questions. Perhaps this inherent uncertainty is fitting. The narrative of Magnolia Grove is ultimately not a matter of genetics or scientific inquiry. It is about power and its perversion, about the ways in which human beings can dehumanize one another when systems exist to facilitate such dehumanization. Edmund Ashford was not a monster by innate disposition. He was a man shaped by a system that affirmed his right to own other human beings, that declared their bodies and their progeny belonged to him, and that sanctioned any cruelty he deemed fit to inflict, justifying it by his feelings of humiliation and betrayal. And what of Delilah herself? What thoughts corned through her mind during those 17 years of bearing children she had not chosen? Of witnessing those children mature, bearing the visage of their father, of seeing some of them subjected to torture and death by a man who held them responsible for circumstances beyond anyone's control. We can only surmise the depths of her suffering and the reservoirs of fortitude that enabled her to endure it. She left no record of her emotions, no account of her experiences. She exists in history solely through the observations of others, a shadow defined by the void surrounding her. The 31 children also merit more consideration than they have received. They were innocent of all transgressions save their very existence. They did not choose to be born. They did not select their countenances or their features. They did not opt to become living reminders of their uncle's treachery and their putative father's humiliation. Nevertheless, they bore the ramifications of these circumstances throughout their lives. From Edmund's malevolence to the torture campaign and their ultimate dispersion at auction, some of them, like Grace Freeman, found avenues to forge meaningful existences despite all that had been inflicted upon them. Others were less fortunate. The 2 children who perished under Edmund's torture were named Daniel and Ruth. According to Dr. Prescott's records, Daniel was 11 years of age at the time of his death. Ruth was 12. Their graves, if they were interred at all, are unmarked and forgotten. They are among the millions of enslaved children whose lives were prematurely extinguished by the institution that purported to be vital to American prosperity. If this narrative has resonated with you, if it has prompted a different perspective on the history that shaped our nation, please consider supporting organizations dedicated to preserving the memories and records of enslaved individuals. These narratives warrant commemoration, even those that prove challenging to absorb, perhaps most significantly those very ones. What are your impressions regarding this particular account? Do you posit a rational scientific cause for the events that unfolded at Magnolia Grove? Alternatively, do you lean towards the notion of something more arcane influencing affairs? Have you unearthed unexpected links within your own ancestral lineage? Share your reflections in the section designated for comments. We extend our gratitude for your viewership and anticipate your presence in our subsequent presentation.